Hello, everyone. I'm here with the producer and writer of the first Skyline and the director and the writer of both the sequels, Liam O'Donnell. Today, I'm going to be interviewing him, just giving some questions to get to know him as a writer and a director, and to get to know why he went into the film industry, and some information on his films. Okay, so to start you off, the most simple question, I think, why did you go into the film industry? Why did you go into filmmaking?
It is a simple question, but I try to think about that and kind of dissect it, because we talk a lot nowadays about kind of opportunity and privilege, and how you kind of think in your mind that you're going to be able to do this strange thing that kind of, for me, I grew up in Massachusetts, which is about the opposite side of the country as Los Angeles, where I live now.
Right, yeah.
But I did have this exposure to the film business that was like a tangential exposure, because my uncle wrote a book about a case that my grandfather, who was a Boston cop who became a lawyer, and he wrote a book called Deadly Force, which got made into a movie in like 1986, starring Richard Crenna as my grandfather, Dylan Baker as my dad, and it was
That's
like a
really
CBS
cool.
like hour something long movie. And it's a really cool story. It's a really cool case. It's the Boston cops. They frame this African American man who was just coming home from work. They had a suspect, and he matches the suspect, but the only thing matching was his race. He was like, a foot shorter than the suspect. The
Right,
car
yeah.
had nothing to do with it, and they just shot him in cold blood. And so, being a former cop, my grandfather, there's the unwritten laws is that you don't go after the BPD. And so the fact that he did, it became this big story. It took years. It basically almost bankrupted the family, but they eventually, won a settlement for the man's family. So
That's an incredible story.
I'm only like 4 or 5 years old, like when that's
Yeah.
happening. But I just remember being at like a party at like, with like my uncles and aunts, and be like, and that man's playing your father, and I'd be like, no, that's not possible. And then like getting older, and you're like, wait, so like the guy from Rambo played my grandfather in something. So I do think that like that little bit of exposure makes things feel like strangely possible.
Yeah.
And then I actually was going to go into politics myself, and I went down to DC and I did an internship after 9/11 in 2002. And that same uncle who had gone into politics after writing that book, he kind of left showbiz. He'd worked for a senator for most of the 90s until West Wing came out. And because they were making a show about the Senate, and this guy was a writer, his agents were like, you are just like you should be on the staff. So he started working with Aaron Sorkin on the West Wing. And so around 2002, he had his own series called Mr. Sterling, which was starring Josh Brolin. And I'm not sure if it was a direct West Wing spinoff, but it was positioned kind of that way.
Yeah.
And it was like an idealistic dude who replaces his father as a senator, his deceased father. And so when I was down there doing being an intern for a senator means you basically give like tours of the Capitol building, and you go into a closet, and they have a robot machine that signs the letters that people to the senator, and you hold the piece of paper, and the marker signs the names. That's like all I did all day. And then my uncle shows up, and they're filming on locations with Josh Brolin, which is Josh Brolin in 2002. Is before his huge to me that's the star of the Goonies. So I had to I was like, I'm gonna talk to this guy about the Goonies. And around that time is my uncle Lawrence O'Donnell is filming this TV show in DC on location. So I got to visit a set for the first time when I was around, I guess 20 years old. And just kind of watching that after being so bored as an intern, I was like, well, this is where the action is. This is a lot of fun, and kind of getting to meet different people on the crew, just kind of being a fly on the wall for a day. I was like, I want to, obviously, like most people, you grow up in love with movies, you grow up in love with the possibility, but then something about it just felt like, oh, this is so possible. All these people they're just normal people, and they're just working really, really hard. So after that, I finished school and decided after that I was gonna head out to LA and see what I could make of that for post graduation.
Well, you definitely made something of it.
Something. Although my Uncle Lord still is confused by what I do, because he's like, aliens? What is this? But yeah.
Okay, well, great response. Yeah, that's really interesting to learn exactly what led to you starting out. Really interesting story.
Yeah, and I'd say that once I got to LA, one of the advantages was I came out with a friend who is a really great visual artist, graphic artist. And so, we were both trying to make connections, but it helped to be like have a roommate, and have a roommate that was, had the similar hopes and dreams as you. He actually just did a bunch of visual effects on Skylines for us. He did all the holograms on top of the console.
Oh, that's cool.
The alien ship, all those moving. I call them the ASMR holograms because they're very kind of like pleasing. And they undulate over it, and so he's a director, a writer, effects artist who, it's just it's another thing I'd recommend to someone, because it could be a very lonely and strange place to just kind of come out by yourself, and just double your chances of meeting the right people if you're out here with a buddy.
Okay, yeah, that's a great bit of advice. So a follow-up question. This isn't actually on my list of questions, but I just had a thought of this. So how long, once you went out to LA, did it take for you to get noticed, for one of your visions to get picked up?
Well, I'd say so. I came out in like October 2004, and kind of bounced around, did a bunch of crappy jobs like messengering and telemarketing and stuff like that. And I'd say it was a few months in that we met a really small production company that were kind of doing like local cable commercials, short films, music videos, stuff like that. And my friend Matthew Santoro that I was describing, he was doing graphics and visuals for them, and I started kind of writing and then like fixing edits for them, and then I did a little actual directing of like a cable commercial for them. And they were friendly with Greg and Colin Strauss from Hydraulics. So it was actually fairly quick, of like maybe I think by mid 2005, because I just started, I kind of fell into treatment writing. Like, okay, here's the commercial. I'm going to write you what the idea of this commercial is, the tone, the feeling you should get. Same with the music video. So it's kind of like it's like a script, but you're allowed to break, the rules a little bit. Feeling when they're watching it. So it's kind of like essay writing, which is made sense because I did like political science, and that's all essay writing. So that led to meeting Greg and Colin, and then writing treatments for them on commercials and music videos. And then I think we booked our first commercial was like August or something, September 2005, and then started kind of really picking up momentum. And then by 2006 was AVP2. He like came across their desk. I just kind of started showing up at their facility every day and what I needed to do. And they were like, "What are we paying you?" And I was like, "I'll take $100 a day." It was like I didn't know what I tried being a PA on commercials and stuff like that, and I was terrible. So if you're a terrible PA, you could. I hated just like you're just like constantly on beck and call, and I'm very sympathetic to crews that try to make it a fun experience for everybody when they're on set, because it could be kind of a militaristic experience, especially if you're at the bottom of the rung. But yeah, so I ended up working on their treatments, and then that led to the AVP2 treatment, and them booking that, and then being on set in the fall of 2006. So that was the first movie. About 2 years after moving out there.
Oh, so you got really lucky then. Got into the business really quick, yeah. So I actually thought of another question while you were talking about that. Has your studying of politics ever come into it? Has that ever helped you out while doing filmmaking?
You always sneak stuff in, and it's just a question of what lands and what doesn't. But I'd say there's a good amount of politics actually in Beyond Skyline and Skylines. But I don't really want you to notice it. I don't want it to hit you over the head, because it's just not that type of movie. But there's definitely. I think you can understand what my views are if you if you look into it.
Oh, I definitely think that is the best form of filmmaking, when politics isn't on the surface and it's hidden within. Because I think often a lot of filmmakers make the mistake of making their messages too obvious and too on the surface, and quite often that just sort of drills the message too far in. When it's more subtle, then you're showing what your opinions are, but obviously you're not forcing it upon the audience, which I think is a lot better of a technique.
Yeah, I mean, I think both work, and it just depends on the material. Like RoboCop is like not subtle at all, but it's like hilarious, and it jams its politics right down your throat. But it's like, it's so absurd, and it fits with the world. So I totally understand what you're saying. I also was, there's a lot of things where in development out here that there's just been like drilled into people, like, why is this movie coming out now? Why is this movie coming out now? It has to be relevant. It has to be relevant. And I think that in that need to be relevant, everyone's kind of saying like they're saying the treatment out loud within the movie in a weird way, like what we were just talking about. They're like really trying to reach out and tell you that this is why this is important right at this moment. But both ways work. I think for like our ambitions are within trying to make the like most fun adventure with the smallest amount of budget. So that's like our ambition is really on this kind of more aesthetic and experiential level. So it for to have something that's like, this is really going to change the world and deal with the most pressing themes of mankind, is not something that's kind of fall upon the head of Rose and Trent, battling.
Yeah, I think they've got more important things to contend with.
Right. So we know what type of franchise we are. So we're comfortable in our sandbox. So it's what makes it fun.
Actually, that leads perfectly into a question that I was going to leave till later, but you've given me the perfect jumping off point there. Tell me about the latest entry of the Skyline trilogy, Skylines, and what sets it apart from other science fiction. Basically, give the people at home why they should buy Skylines.
Okay, well, I'll first say what sets it apart from the previous two, because the first movie is a very contained invasion movie from a very kind of narrow POV, and the second one was taking that concept and like breaking it wide open into a run and gun adventure invasion movie.
Brilliant as well, I have to say. The sequel was nothing what I thought it was going to be. It really blew my mind when I saw it. It was It
It's like
really
a
took the
dare.
whole idea and made it so much bigger.
Yeah, it's like it just dares itself to keep topping itself and
Yeah.
keep going crazier. And so the third one, almost a completely different genre. We kind of jumping, forward into a post-apocalyptic future, and we're going on a big space adventure. Now, I would say the biggest sell to it for me is if you ever kind of like find yourself on a Friday and Saturday night, and you're going back, and you kind of want to watch an Aliens or Predator movie, but you've seen them too many times, and you're like, why don't they just make movies like that anymore? Then this is the movie for you. Because it was like I literally kind of wanted to make something that could have come out in like 1988, 89,
Yeah.
but like with today's tech and with some, like we said, a little bit of modern day politics attitude, a really great lead in Lindsay Morgan, but it is kind of like a very intentional throwback to what I find to be my comfort films,
Yeah.
the films that I keep revisiting. And like there's all these cues of new movies that I have to see, but I'm going to watch Predator again. So to me, that's like that's like the simplest, reason why I made it, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah.
But the other one would be, and what sets it apart to me, it's very much indebted to the films of James Cameron, would be Aliens, Terminator, even Avatar. But it's kind of what's neat about it is that the aliens themselves are like this brother and sister relationship, and they're actually leading the mission.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
they have this like love and begrudging respect with each other, and that kind of makes up the heart of the film. And so it also, I think, works really well if you watch all three at once, because like visuals and concepts within these films that we don't explain to you, but they're visually there, and if you can see them visually progress over a weekend, you kind of understand little things that are satisfying in different ways, like when Rose is blasting this core drive, and when the big finale at the end when she kind of turns the tables. So
I can definitely confirm that, because I had a bit of a Skyline marathon myself when the new one came out. Watched all three back to back, and they definitely do carry over one into another. They do fit very well as a trilogy.
That's great. Yeah, because that was kind of the whole idea of like, because I knew it's not a very traditional trilogy in some ways, because each one has different leads and it's jumping in different parts of time. Mm-hmm. But I just felt like if I can visually subvert a bunch of things from 1 and 2 in 3, it'll at least kind of feel like it's all kind of. I kind of feel like the first one is like, and Beyond is sort of like Fellowship, and this one's still one. I still feel like there needs to be like one more chapter. But
I certainly would not complain.
Yeah, I feel like the first one's like a prequel, and these other ones are starting to come into an interesting kind of, would be a trilogy onto their own. But we'll see.
Okay, so 2 questions for you from that, and they're both questions I was going to say later, but you've given me a perfect jumping off point again. So my first one is actually how Beyond Skyline came about. Was it always intended to be set to begin with during the events of the first film and then going on, or was that something that happened later in development? And my other question being, how far in development is a potential Skyline 4? Has it been greenlit? When can we potentially see that?
Okay. Well, for Beyond first is that was, we kind of did, Joshua Cortez, who wrote the first one and co-wrote the first one with me, and then we co-wrote the treatment for Beyond. Both times we kind of like wrote our own little treatments and then compared them. And so for Beyond, I just was like, I really liked the idea of the subway thing, and I really liked the idea of it happening at the same time. And I think that was the main influence, was the episode in season 2 of Lost, I think it was called like The Other 32 or something like that. And it was all the survivors that Michelle Rodriguez was the leader of. And it kind of had this great episode, this kind of like bottle episode in a weird way, where it just went per season from their POV, and then linked them up in the next episode, and they became part of the cast. And so I was like, oh, that's such a cool way to open, this movie, if we kind of show these other survivors. And they were very deliberately supposed to be the survivors that Jared and Oliver see through the window fighting against those that tanker with the machine gun on the truck. So it was very intricately like laid out that they were in the tunnels and they were making their way across the city for the 3 days. That was the original concept. And then the still the shape of the movie kind of always stayed the same. But the first draft, I would say, of Beyond, they crashed in New York, and Jared and Elaine stayed alive. They still were introduced later in the script, but they were and it was like piloting a tanker. And so once it kind of like finished the draft and started going out to actors and talking to Frank, he wanted to make it more of a standalone movie, give him more things to do. So that meant kind of decreasing their roles and making it more about Mark, which made sense. And that's also why all of a sudden, Rose became this bigger character, because she wasn't even supposed to be born until the end of the movie. And so
I see,
now she's born, she's growing throughout the thing. That's like where I ran out of road in the screening, and they're like, what happens to this girl? We need to see what happens to her. So then we did this reshoot, adding the bookends with Lindsay Morgan, and lo and behold, that becomes a whole other sequel. So it's crazy how these things kind of like, develop over time, and then that ends up becoming like, now I feel like she's kind of this iconic character Trilogy, because he's kind of like the John Connor, Ellen Ripley combined into, she's just like the most important character, but she wasn't even supposed to be born in that movie yet. But I mean, those are the normal changes that you kind of go through from first draft through production.
It definitely does have a family vibe to it throughout the trilogy. It does feel like it's very much this centric family is the whole heart of the trilogy.
Well, that's very nice to hear. I mean, that was definitely the inspiration from my end, because I'd say that, like I said, we did 2 different treatments, and I had just had my first son when we were writing the first Skyline, and we were writing it in like November 2009. He was born in September, so it was all very fresh in my head about being having to suddenly become a father and stop, And so Jared was like me, and it was Josh, because Josh had moved from New York to LA to become a visual effects artist. So that was very much his biography part, and mine was the, oh my God, I'm about to have a baby, and it feels like my whole world's ending, and I have to suddenly grow up. And so that was kind of where we came from on the first movie.
Yeah.
And then the second one, it was like, okay, if I'm gonna, I just wanted to be a little bit more like switch the parameters from this contained thriller. Very much, I think a lot of the first one was a 9/11 feeling, even though we didn't consciously want it to be that way. But it was that feeling of just being helpless and not being able to do anything. And we even saw in the marketing for the first one, they started bringing the actors in the studio and having them say stuff like, "We've got to fight back." And we're like, no one's really in the movie. I mean, he put an alien in the face at one point. It wasn't like, Will Smith. So I felt like that experience was like, okay, if we're going to do a second one, we really have to, have more actionable characters who can take matters into their own hand. And so that was all about kind of creating this Die Hard on an alien ship concept that then once we went over to Asia and we scouted and we get Iko and Yayan, then all of a sudden martial arts get added to the movie. And so like this taking matters in their own hand, explodes. So again, it's just that evolution of I guess the just kind of following the muse of what that movie had to be. So your second question, beyond for a sequel. Well, I always I'm always suffering, and so I started writing 4. I have a treatment for 4. It's actually proving to me to be the most difficult one to write so far, because I feel like I've been kind of coy and actually making a sequel, and I've made 2 sequels that aren't really sequels. They're kind of standalone, self-contained movies, but I feel like with part 4, you're dealing with these characters and all this backstory and all this history now that I kind of have to actually just write a sequel now. So it's a lot of fun. The characters are talking to me, which is always nice, and I really have such an affection for those characters, and so that part of it's easy. But I'm trying to deliver something really surprising. I feel like if you look at part 4, it's like you kind of have to upend things and do things different. It can't just be the same regurg. So I'm really trying to flex and take the time to make it as good as it can be.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel.
No promises that it'll ever be made, but it definitely won't get made if I don't write it. So I have to write it.
That's very true. So is the sequel your next project? Where can we find your work next? What's next for you?
I'm currently developing a couple of different things, and a couple of scripts I didn't write that I'd be coming on to direct in a couple of different genres, but it doesn't look like anyone's like going to get made like within the next month or anything because of this pandemic. So I was lucky enough to get my first vaccine dose this weekend because there was an excess shipment to LA, and a friend actually and said, hey, they're taking. So thankfully, in a month I'll be vaccinated completely, and then I hopefully I could start scouting. One of the projects would be in Eastern Europe again, which is where we shot Skylines. And there's a smaller horror movie that kind of could be done anywhere, a more kind of domestic, sort of James Wan type of horror movie with some visual effects elements that would kind of make sense why they'd want me to do it.
I know in the written interview you were saying that you've always liked the Evil Dead franchise, so it would be interesting to see that sort of thing from you. Certainly, when I read that, I thought, "Yeah, I get this guy."
Yeah,
man,
that's funny.
man by my own heart, sort of
thing. Which interview was that?
The written interview that you did for me, you mentioned during it that you quite liked Evil Dead.
I just did a podcast with the Atkins Undisputed podcast, and we're talking about sequels. And Mike, who runs the podcast, is a really, really, watches a ton of movies. And so I asked him, what franchise do you think is like the most one-to-one for us, because we have such a weird sequel structure? And he sat there and thought for a long time, and he did say Evil Dead. He's like, because you got the first movie is straight ahead, kind of very low budget horror. The second one's kind of a remake that goes bonkers. And then the third one just jumps ahead into this other, I guess, back in time, but we go forward in time into a completely different genre adventure. And so I thought that was very smart.
Yeah, it is definitely. The comparison is definitely there. I was thinking
they're up here, but I thought I thought that was, it does make sense. And yes, this domestic horror movie has actually very strong Evil Dead visual energy, so that's Sam Raimi's a hero. So
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that would be something fun to do.
That's
and again, something I didn't write, and sometimes I'm finding that to be refreshing, because I feel like I've got to do so much in these 2 movies that I'm kind of open to exploring, new things and new ideas, because it's like these movies are so much, they're quite indulgent. So it's kind of interesting to step outside of myself and translate different material, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it gives you a different perspective on the industry as a whole as well.
Yes.
Okay, so if I just gonna check what questions I had left. Yeah, so actually this one feeds quite nicely into it. So if there was any franchise, any at all, of any kind of budget, be it a B movie or a big budget franchise, what franchise that's already established would you like to work on?
Is interesting because that Mortal Kombat trailer came out this past week, and I remember back in Indonesia in like 2015 talking with Frank Grillo's Colin, being like, man, I would Mortal Kombat with like Frank as Johnny Cage and Eco and bring all these things.
I can see that.
And I was like, it's such a 1-to-1. And then seeing what they did with it, and it looked really, really amazing. I was quite jealous, to be honest with you, because it's kind of funny, like, because there's so many reboots and obviously, like most, I'd kill to work on Marvel and Star Wars and any of the big ones, but I guess because Mortal Kombat only had this other movie, which I love, by the way, and the first film I ever made for school with my friend Matthew Santora, the guy I moved out to LA with. We made our own kung fu movie in the backyard, and we scored it to the Mortal Kombat score. So it's got a real place, but it felt like more special than some of that stuff, because we've seen so much new versions of the other thing. So yeah, I don't know, maybe part 2, Mortal Kombat 2.
That would definitely be interesting.
But
it's funny,
it feels like it's my wheelhouse. I feel like I would want to do something like that, like like a sequel to like Big Trouble in Little China would be amazing. I wouldn't want to do a remake, but something within those worlds. That would be a lot of fun. Yeah.
It was actually quite interesting to hear you say about this little, I guess, fun project you did as a kid, making this little film in your back garden and that, because for years I used to do the same on YouTube, just making like stupid little films with my childhood friends and that. So I can very much relate to you on that one.
I just texted him actually after that trailer came out and was like, do you have it? Because it's on a VHS. And it's like, because I'm trying to think exactly the year, but it would be like 7th grade. So we're like 12 or 13. So it'd be like 1992. So it's like just before you could really do digital editing. Like we edited it on 2 VHSs. So we had like a VHS tape to a VHS tape, and we couldn't figure out a way to get, like, he had a screensaver of the Star Wars scroll, and so we did a Star Wars scroll at the beginning, but we couldn't figure out a way to do it. So we just took his camcorder and pointed it at the monitor and recorded the scroll, and that's the beginning of it. And it's like doing autofocus during the scroll. So it's kind of that like delightfully home. I'm gonna have to look for it this weekend, and hopefully I can post that online, because it is quite funny.
That would definitely be funny to watch. Okay, so moving on then. What else did I want to ask? Who is your favorite character in the Skyline trilogy, and why?
Interesting. Favorite. I have to go with Trent. I named my latest son after him, so I think it would be a big betrayal if I didn't. But at the same time, there's a couple of different characters. Iko's character Sua is named after my oldest son, 11. His Lao name is Sua Tiger. So that was kind of like a little bit of like I wanted to give my son like a badass martial artist that's named after him, so that you can have that feather in your cap. But yeah, I think Trent is especially in part 3. He just kind of becomes, he's a little bit like my voice in the movie. Like I'm kind of getting to just, I get to go in and I record the voices for the sound guys, and then they redo it. So it's a little bit of me just kind of like doing my own running commentary on the movie. So I have a lot of fun with that. And I think it's also fun because he starts as, kind of this punk in the second one. And, it's like he can get on people's nerves, I suppose. And then he kind of has this big heroic arc across the next two. It becomes our just our badass Terminator. So I'd say first and foremost him, followed closely by Rose, because Rose is really the heart of the whole thing. And I think I just remember watching Lindsay doing the green screen day where she was going to do the claw, and like how because that's like her blasting this claw on a big stage, nothing. And it was towards the end of the shoot. Everyone's exhausted, tired. And she just so focused and taking this preposterous stuff that I'm coming up with so seriously and doing it so hard that I was just like, there's just no one else that, could have done this movie. She was just perfect for it. And she really elevated it from what it was on the page. So I feel like I'm indebted to her. Also give it up, Frank Grillo's Mark, because I do feel like he's got just so much kind of color and grit, and it's a kind of role that I like to see him in quite a bit.
Yeah.
I basically was like, if I was going to be in a disaster, who would I want to be with? And if I'm on the subway, I just want this guy to be next to me. I don't want to. And so that was kind of why I wrote it from this perspective of like he reminded me a little bit of my friend Matthew Santoro's dad, who was a cop, and the type of person who is like, when the chips are down, like there's something in their brain that's just going to flip, and they're going to kind of try to take control and help everybody and make you feel safe. And so yeah, those are definitely not anything unexpected as far as my favorite ones. The core leads.
All brilliant reasons. Certainly Mark is my favorite, and you can't beat Rose. Brilliant casting on that one.
Cool.
In fact, the casting in the third movie I thought was brilliant as a whole, such as the main villain being played by an actor that I remember from growing up watching Primeval. And then the main lead female being from shows like The 100. I thought it was brilliant to have those recognizable faces within your franchise.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think Alec, it's funny because like I didn't watch Deep Space Nine. I kind of came to Star Trek later in life, and I enjoy it now, and I'm watching Next Generation now. Finished their movies like around Christmas, and now I'm going back into the series because like television series are just, there's so much of it, I get kind of overwhelmed. But I came to Alexander Siddig from like, oh, this is the guy from Syriana, this is the guy from Kingdom of Heaven. Like to me he's like this amazing, great movie actor, and everyone else like, and of course Game of Thrones. But I still kind of saw him as this amazing screen presence in film. And then seeing during the promotion how crazy the Star Trek fans were, and kind of went back and looked at some of the stuff. I'm like, wow, that's great. That was really great for us. So it's kind of funny. I feel like it was to my benefit that I wasn't like super intimidated and could just talk to him, and not totally geek out. Because it wasn't. Oh my God. But yeah, that ended like for us, and each movie kind of has these amazing sort of last minute additions, and I feel like that was on the second one. It was Iko and Yayan were like just this total shock that they're getting, and that was on the martial arts side, and for Skylines it was Alexander, Rona, and James Cosmo were like right at the last minute. We get these three amazing British actors that really grounded everything. I mean, they're all really right there front and center in the first act, putting the story on the track, and setting it all the way through. And then the very end scenes with Alexander, that was like, once he kind of comes out with the gun and I'm filming this, it was like this eureka moment in my head that I was like, I'm filming a James Bond scene. Oh my God. Like I'm on an alien spaceship and I've got my James Bond monologue with them at gunpoint, and I was like, "Oh, pitch me! This is so amazing."
Very much a James Bond villain moment, yeah.
Yeah. It's even this moment where it's this great edit that Barrett Heathcote, our editor, did, where he's got the gun and it should be over, and then he just like continues explaining, and he stayed on that shot that one bit, and that's when it cuts to like Rose and Leon being like, all right, let's kill this guy. But so it was it was a lot of fun to shoot that, and kind of do something so arch, and even the Home in London in Time for Tea, that to me was a wink to Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall speech that Ronnie Cox did, where he's like, home in time for cornflakes, but I wanted to do the British version.
Well, I thought he was the perfect fit for the villain. I've seen him as a villain in stuff before. He definitely always portrays a villainous role very well. If you haven't already seen it, I would highly recommend watching Primeval. He plays the villain in the last 2 seasons of that, and he does a phenomenal job.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
that was a old sci-fi show. Well, I say old, relatively old, from when I was younger, from the early 2000s. It only ran for 5 seasons, and it had a Canadian spin-off for 1 season. But I would definitely recommend you give that a watch if that's the kind of thing that you're interested in.
Cool. All right.
Okay, so. So what was your favorite moment throughout making the Skyline trilogy? One moment, if you could choose any one moment, on screen or off screen, doesn't matter if it's behind the scenes, just give the audience what you had as your favorite moment.
2 come to mind, one from each movie, but I'd say the first one is just that first day of filming on Beyond Skyline, and it's the first day that I'm really directing anything aside from like before we talked about local cable commercials, really, really cheap, low budget stuff. Everything that I'd done up until that point in 2014 was either writing or producing.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like over your director's shoulder. You're almost there, but you're not really on the hot seat. And you can kind of not take things as personal, I guess, and just to be like, to just shooting this, and it's like, these are some of my favorite actors in this scene, and I'm shooting this was really, really crazy. But I'll give you the exact moment. It was like, so I was nervous as hell, where they're coming up to that hut and they're changing the clothes. This is in the jungle with Frank, Iko, Oyana, and Pamela and the baby. And so you got a crying baby, and I'm overshooting it because I'm like, okay, we need the shot from here. We need it from here. I was just overdoing the walk up and the coverage, not kind of quite knowing, just being inexperienced. And then we start the scene, which is a really hard first scene to shoot because you have 4 actors and a baby, and they're in sort of like a sort of a triangle, kind of like a rhombus of coverage and lines and eye lines and stuff. And so we're going on one side, and it's okay. We're getting all right. It's like it's tricky, and then boom, the rain starts, and it just becomes a totally washed out. Everyone has to get under umbrellas, and just kind of sitting there, letting it wash over me that like, okay, this is the first day filming, and we're already behind schedule because we're losing an hour in rain right now. So okay, if we shoot back in this direction of everything we shot, nothing's going to match because all of a sudden it's going to go from very hot sun to just cloud cover, even though the rain ended in an hour. So the idea was, okay, let's flip it around and start shooting the fight. So we just kind of cut past the rest of the scene and let's start doing the fight. But there's mud everywhere. And, so they start doing the first half of the fight, and that's a lot of fun. And then we get into what was the second part, and there's this big, huge mud puddle. And I just kind of was like, there was this throw that was part of the choreo, and I was there in the middle of the puddle. And of course, Frank goes and grabs Iko, and Iko jumps up and really sells it. And he just slammed him down right in the middle of the puddle, and the water went up perfectly. And I just put my hands up like this, like, yes! And so that was one of those moments where it's just like thinking back of my whole life of like watching pro wrestling and like playing video games and all the things your parents said were a complete waste of time. And I was like using it to do this thing with my favorite actors that I've always wanted to do. Was just like,
what an amazing moment. Yeah,
it was an amazing moment. And so the moment on part 3, which was my kind of pinch myself like most emotional moment, was shooting Lindsay's side when Trent is letting go and going to take on the matriarch, and I voiced, and she was acting against me on the other side of the camera. And I was just like, I just got so emotional. And I realized it's every movie. I'm like, you have to be every character. But it was one of those moments where I kind of realized in part 2 that I was Trent. And then in this one, it was this feeling of like, this I just loved everybody in this movie so much and had this like intense connection to the character and to the moment. And it was just like, well, if I'm feeling this, like somebody's got to feel it too. And I just felt really, really grateful that we had gotten to make that story and kind of capture that moment, and that she had given so much to it. So those are the two very contrasting moments, but it's like he's kind of like you kind of transcend out of yourself for a second. And,
well, that last moment that you mentioned actually goes great into my next question, which is, did you ever expect to get a trilogy when you made the first film?
No,
was that?
No, I it's like, and I didn't expect. I will say that I didn't. It goes through phases, right? Like, so you're in post on the first one. They're spending millions of dollars marketing it. And the studio Relativity says we want a sequel. So we're like, okay. So we wrote like a bigger sequel, and it felt like, yeah, that's gonna happen. It comes out, it underperforms. For nowadays, it did well, but back then it underperformed. Like the theater, it's interesting, Nowadays, like making 22 million domestic, you're like, okay, but back then it was like, oh, we were hoping for 50. So it underperforms, and the critics hate the movie. So then you're like, okay, this is done, it's over, moving on to something else, and then you kind of see that it had this weird life, and it did so well in different parts of the world, Russia and China, and in parts of Asia. So that was like around 2012, 2013. I started being like, okay, this suddenly seems possible, and then I was like all in on like, yes, we can get this sequel made. Then after finishing the sequel and having it take 2.5 years to make. It was a real grueling movie, both shooting it and in post, and feeling like, we shot that movie to be another theatrical movie. It wasn't, and this was kind of in this nebulous time where like what Netflix was in 2014 when we started, by the time what Netflix and VOD was in 2017 when it came out, completely shifted. So it was like a complete change of what these sort of movies would be and what would qualify as theatrical. The kind of lines are they were moved, and so I just thought, like, we're just lucky that we finished this movie at all. There's no way we're going to get another one, and I had to really be talked into by my producer to write the script for part 3. I did the treatment because I had the story and I really liked it, and I was like, well, who knows? But when it came out, I'm like, I just don't see this happening. We spent too much money. There's no way it made that much, but it actually ended up doing really, really well on Blu-ray and DVD, and we had a really good Netflix deal, and so there was a pathway to make a third one if we could make it for less money and in a more efficient manner, which we did. And so now part 3, it's like, okay, who knows? It's like we continue to go on. I think in order to get a part 4 made, it would need to have these kind of things that I'm talking about. We're bringing together a bigger cast in an even more exciting direction, and who knows, these things can happen. But you just can't really underestimate how hard it's so hard to get original things made. And when you have that built-in awareness of a franchise, it definitely helps. So we'll see.
Okay, so my final question for you today: what hobbies do you have outside of filmmaking? What do you do in your spare time?
This is a good question. I've not much. I'm a father of 4, so the first thing is just child raising. I don't think that's an actual hobby, but that's what takes up most of my time. We like to go on bike rides. We're in Southern California, so we like to go on bike rides, like go on walks, hiking. We just went up to Big Bear for the first time. Beautiful. I had no idea how different. Like, it's a 2.5-hour drive from LA, but you're in a mountain town, which is gorgeous. The kids loved Legoland before the pandemic, and we like to go to the beach quite a bit. I'm a soccer coach, which I guess is football for you guys. I didn't really play it. I played it up to like 6th grade, and then I did American football. But because my kids really just love soccer, so I've been assistant coaching it in the fall and the spring, I guess for like the past 5 years. So that's kind of been my main thing, which is always kind of funny. Like I try to say on set, I'm a soccer dad. Like, you guys don't really understand, like, outside of this alien world, like, my kids are just like, drive me to soccer practice, Dad. That's kind of my my normal day to day. So we'll be starting up in the spring. In fall, only 2 people on a team could use a ball, and they couldn't really challenge each other. It's quite. The coach is like, the kids like turned on me halfway through. Because they're just so bored, because like it was all passing drills, like for an hour, running and passing drills, and they were just, it's hard to do it without that lure of like competition and challenging each other. So yeah, and I'm an avid weightlifting enthusiast, which was another tough thing for the pandemic, but I've built a weight kind of set up in my garage. I just got some new bumper plates that I'm very excited about, and my wife can't stand it, but I actually do use it every day, so she will at least like begrudgingly allows me to get my time out in the garage every morning or evening.
Well, I think that's it. So
All right.
thank you so much for taking your time to give me this interview. Well, I think that's all we're going to cover today, but
right.
if I think of anything else I'd like to ask you, I'll DM you.
Yeah, I just need to know what your grade is for this project because I'm a lot invested in it by now. So I'm just going to tell your professors, that this has to be an A. And
Yeah, I wouldn't complain if you did.
so yeah, thank you, James. It was a pleasure talking to you, and best
Yeah,
of
pleasure
luck in
talking to
all
you.
your future endeavors.
Well, hopefully, if I get big enough in the industry, maybe one day we can work together.
Yes, if you could hire me, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, if you ever need an extra, just in one of your films, just in the background somewhere, you know who to contact.
Absolutely. Not like a UK franchise, who knows? We might actually film in the UK next time.
Well, that would be great. Like I say, you've got all my contact details, so if you ever need anything from me, you know where to find me.
All right. Well,
Well,
thank you, James.
thanks again.
Okay.
All right,
Take
bye for
care.
now.